Yeah, I mean the cutting edge of kind of our models at QRI is the brain as a nonlinear optical computer, and we think that yeah, muscle tension modulates some of the parameters of this computer. So let me explain like what I mean by that. So um, the way we think of the brain at QRI these days is yeah, essentially as like a system that is modulating electromagnetic waves for computation. Um, One way in which you can modulate electromagnetic waves or light in the simplest case is using lenses. And the way a lens works is you're changing the index of refraction, um, and you have a particular shape such that like light will go through a very particular path. It changes direction, it focuses, or diverges, whatever, depending on the shape of the lens. Um, Now imagine that you have sort of like some kind of electrical grid in in space with various kind of like transparent muscles, where when you tense the muscles, it becomes kind of like a different type of material. That then it becomes kind of like a different index of refraction. So by tensing the muscles, you can modulate how light moves. That is what we think roughly is happening. So when you have like a lot of kind of like muscle tension, as you kind of like move these waves around, they get distorted and they reflect and refract and they cause turbulence and chaos. And it's kind of like an unpleasant, dissonant state. So, like, yeah, for example, if you have a lot of muscle tension and then you take a hit of DMT, you are going to have a bad time because all of that energy is going to be kind of like bouncing off in these
Mm.
super uncomfortable ways. Now, when you're like really deeply relaxed, all the muscles are relaxed, then the waves move without distortions or diffraction, refraction, twisting around, and that seems to be like a very key um, ingredient or factor for kind of like some of the most coherent, beautiful states of mind, is that you require kind of like that smooth background with very little muscle
Mm.
tension. There is one caveat I will say, which is that if the muscle tension is happening in regular symmetrical patterns, then that actually is fine because that can also create a scaffold for different types of waves that are more energetic, but also can be very euphoric. So the problem with muscle tension is more kind of irregular muscle tension than like muscle tension itself.
Very interesting. Very interesting to hear. Just to reflect on this, I got out of an ayahuasca experience that was very um, somatically difficult.
Yeah,
Like lots of just like, kinds of shaking and pain. And the shaman basically said, you should just not lift weights for a year.
huh?
And I had been and just do yoga and really open up your body, like open up all of this tension. And I had
Yeah,
been, an athlete that had basically been lifting weights for multiple decades straight. And stopped that and did that. And yeah, it just was like, this might be out of the scope of what you guys study, but it just reminds me of like, as I really just started to allow my body to naturally relax and do lots of yoga and fascia work, it was just like, man, I could just feel that energy just like coming out of all these little pockets that had been, yes, almost like it was like stored, almost kind of like stored.
yeah,
And I don't know if that's quite the same as like, I forget how you put it, but like kind of distorted tension versus normal tension. But it was just, yeah, it was super congruent with my direct experience.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a very relevant concept here, which is the concept of a geometric frustration, which might explain some of what you were feeling.
Mm.
So um, if you have like, let's say, like a square lattice of a magnetic material, and each of the atoms in the square lattice can be, let's say, like aligned up or down magnetically, there's going to be some stable configurations of that. Let's say like all of the atoms are like perfectly aligned. Like, okay, like that minimizes the discrepancy of each atom and the ones next door. But if instead what you have is a triangular lattice, um, then you're in trouble because there's no way of like positioning each of the magnets in such a way that they're aligned with the neighbors. In other words, the shape of the lattice makes it so that you will always be frustrated. There's going to be always like tension. There's going to be regions where like two positive poles are pointing in the same direction, where two negative poles and pointing in the same direction. So think about like, yeah, for example, well, so like, yeah, lifting weights in some sense, I suppose like generally, if you're not doing a more general annealing practice, but yeah, it's something like maybe you're pumping out like energy, but you're not doing it uniformly, right? So you may not notice that like your energy channels are actually in a geometrically frustrated state. That like, yes, actually there are regions of your energy body that are like pointing in the same direction. But then on ayahuasca, you pump your system full of energy, and all of those little conflicting regions become highlighted because there's just too much energy. It's going to go through all of the paths. And it just turns out some of those paths are actually like in internal conflict with each other. Whereas, yeah, something like yoga actually kind of like might minimize that. Like it's all about like, yeah, making the energy flow regular and smooth and directional. So getting rid of those little kinks or like, yeah, geometric frustration over time.